Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassidy Ellis. I am Local Government's Program Manager for SPEAR, and I run the City Efficiency Leadership Council. Today, we are kicking off 2020 with a kind of special webinar. So many of you on the line may know that CELC runs monthly webinars on topics related to energy efficiency in the public sector. But this month, we are co-presenting with the Energy Services Coalition Texas Chapter. So very excited to have this joint presentation and glad for everyone to join us today. So, as usual, I will get us started with some announcements. So, Energy Services Coalition, we have a quarterly chapter meeting. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 4th in Arlington at NCTCOG. All of these announcements will go out to participants with links after the presentation. So don't worry too much about writing all of this down. My next CELC webinar will return to our usual time and day. So it will be Thursday, February 20th, 9 to 10 a.m. And we will be bringing back a presenter who presented at my Central Texas meeting in December to talk about TERP and VW settlement air quality grants for local governments. Very big topic of conversation for folks interested in fleet efficiency and electrification. SPEAR will be hosting our annual conference, and we're shaking things up a little bit this year, but we are presenting it in September 2020 in San Antonio. Details to follow, and it's rebranded as C2020. So stay tuned for more information. Also, very excitingly, the Texas chapter has been selected to host the Energy Services Coalition National Conference this year as well. And it will be here in my hometown of Austin at the Driscoll on October 26th through 28th. Again, details to follow, and very much look forward to looping the ESPC community and customers into that conference in October. Many of you CELC regulars are familiar with the work that I do with local government energy reporting. This is statute mandated efficiency and reporting requirements for governments in non-attainment and nearing non-attainment counties. That deadline has currently been pushed to February 1st, 2020. So get those online reports in if you haven't already. And if you know what I'm talking about, then you're probably subject to this requirement. Finally, in 2020, as promised, I am producing CEUs. Now, these are unaffiliated with a specific credentialing agency. They are basically certificates that I am going to prepare and send out to participants, documenting your participation in webinars and CELC roundtables. These are for self-reporting entities. So for example, I am a LEED accredited professional. A certain amount of my continuing education units can be self-reported education. So if you have that kind of licensure or certification, hopefully these certificates will help you get towards your CEU requirements. So in the follow-up email that I typically send, there will be information about that as well as your CEU certificate for participation in our conversation today. As always, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or top of your screen, wherever your controls landed. We do our Q&A through the written box. Audio is just a little complicated on these things. So please type in your questions and answers. Devin and I are really looking forward to an interactive conversation today, hoping that you don't just listen to the two of us yammering on for 45 minutes and then go on our way. So please interrupt us with question and answer or questions, and we will do our best to pick those up as we go along. Okay, so for those of you who are less familiar with the City Efficiency Leadership Council, it is a collaborative network of public sector entities within Texas. focused on the sharing of resources and information around public sector energy management best practices. I primarily work with participants through in-person regional roundtables, webinars like today, and then a few technical and specific assistance projects, as well as a number of educational content options, including some emerging content this year related to action cities can take to support efficiency in Texas. So stay tuned. If you're interested in participating in the CELC, get in touch with me. I will follow up with a email after this with my contact information. And then our co-presenter today is the Energy Services Coalition. So the Energy Services Coalition is, we are members of the Texas chapter of a national organization focused on the promotion and education and outreach around guaranteed energy savings performance contracting. So that is the topic of conversation today. The ESC is a public-private partnership, so the State Energy Conservation Office, SECO, is the public sector co-chair of the state chapter and a booster of the work of the chapter. So we have some folks on the line today from SECO as well. And ESC members, we're a number of different representatives of different parts of the industry, including a number of ESCOs, some public sector folks, SECO, and SPEAR. Okay, so just to kind of get us started on the topic of conversation today, wanted to start with a common description of what is a guaranteed energy savings performance contract. Devin will cover this again, but for the purposes of our conversation today, this is the definition we will be using. It is a procurement method for energy, water, renewables, and resilient capital improvement that uses guaranteed utility and maintenance savings to pay for the cost of improvement. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And why are we talking about this? Amongst the chapter membership, of which I am a part of, we discussed kind of what is it that ESC is trying to accomplish. And we identified that there is some misunderstanding and confusion about process and kind of what the value is. We're interested in educating the market about the possibilities and opportunities of GESPCs. And that's because ultimately we're coming from a place of believing in it. We believe that this is a very valuable tool to solve persistent deferred maintenance and facilities opportunities in the public sector. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and transition into Devin's portion of the conversation. I'm going to let Devin give you a little bit of information about himself and launch into the content. Again, please add questions and answers as we go along, and I'll jump in here a couple points during the presentation to cover some discrete items as well. So Devin, take it away.
Great, thank you. First of all, just to make sure, can everybody hear me okay? Am I coming through all right without any major technical difficulties?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, Cassidy. So as Cassidy mentioned, my name is Devin Castleton. I'm currently a business development manager with McKinstry right now. A little bit about my background. I've kind of been in and out of the industry since 2005. I started in the consulting arena where I was following different markets within the ESCO industry and directly started working in the industry in 2010. Since then, my main focus for the last few years has been K through 12, but I do have some exposure with local government, cities and counties, and some higher education. And I think the main elements of ESPC translate pretty universally to those vertical markets. But I have been in a few different places in the industry up until this point. One thing I want to make mention, I want to thank Cassidy for not only helping navigate through the slides today, but Cassidy was also extremely helpful in developing the content. and editing and things like that to make sure that we have a good, concise message for you. If you don't mind, Cassie, going to the next slide. Yeah, that one's fine. So as Cassidy mentioned, she went over the definition that we used. We did a survey for our local chapter members of the Energy Services Coalition here in Texas, and got some good feedback that we're going to use a little bit throughout this presentation, to not only kind of give definitions for things, but also to help understand a more practical definition of how some of these things apply in the day-to-day life in terms of ESPCs. One thing that I think is really important when we talk about what is performance contracting, there's a lot of definitions for it. We're going to use the one that Cassidy gave just a moment ago that's there on your screen. One of the things that I think is super important when talking about performance contracting and what it's about and how it helps things is to not only understand what performance contracting was designed to help improve or to alleviate in terms of issues and problems, but to really understand what's causing those issues. Because I've always felt like the better grasp and understanding that the client has, not only on the ESPC process, but on the issues that it's trying to resolve, those tend to be the more successful projects. And one of the examples that I'm going to make here is, so one of the things that we all deal with in terms of facilities at your organizations is deferred maintenance. And the deferred maintenance can cause a number of different issues. I mean, aside from just the technical equipment issues on the ground, deferred maintenance over years and years and years can start to cause some pretty intense, severe financial volatility within budgets. So it's not only an operational headache for ops directors, but it's also a financial headache for CFOs. And I think the better understanding that we have as to how ESPC can help to alleviate some of those things, the better off everybody is. So with that definition, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. One of the things that we focus on with ESPC is we're always going to focus on the areas of deferred maintenance that have some kind of a performing element. So when we're talking about deferred maintenance, we're not talking about carpet and paint. We're talking more about HVAC, controls, lighting, and those types of things that actually have a return on investment for when we replace or retrofit those types of things. So what are performance contracts not? And these come from some of the survey responses, which I think were very insightful. One here says it is not a way to save money, it's a way to redirect costs and have a positive environmental impact. I think that is super important to understand. It's really important to understand if you're doing a performance contract, in 99.9% of the cases, I will avoid using always. I'm going to go based on mostly my observation and experience. ESPCs or GESPCs are not designed to fund initiatives outside of these facility improvements that they're directed and focused on. For example, if you're a K through 12 organization, a performance contract in most cases is not going to fund things like teacher salaries or any special projects or initiatives. These things are not going to do that. These things are going to be focused on redirecting all things back into facilities. Performance contracting is not a financing mechanism, and this is really important. We'll talk more about this. Performance contracting is not a financing mechanism, it's a procurement method. And within that procurement method, there are ways to finance these projects in a number of different ways, and we'll talk about that. But try not to think of performance contracting as a financing mechanism, because it's much more broad and inclusive than that. So also with performance contracts, it's not, we say often in the industry, it's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, it's not something that's going to come in and fix all of your problems. It's effective ESPCs are done when both the client and the partner have a very thorough understanding of the issues that are being addressed and resolved, and also have very clear communication and expectations on how these projects are going to perform and provide benefit. And also, most importantly, these are not too good to be true. However, like I mentioned, an effective ESPC will require both a good partner for a client, but also a client who fully understands the process, the purpose, and the value. So these things absolutely can work. I know that those of us on the ESC committee here, we're big believers in this. I am a big believer in this, and I always like to mention, because I feel like it's important. For me personally, I work a lot in the K through 12 space, and I think it's important for me to understand, you know, I have 2 children that go to Texas public schools, so this hits home to me. I pay the ISD taxes, and as a taxpayer and as a parent and as a constituent in the community, I want to know that the funds are being spent well, that they're good stewards of our finances and things like that. So I believe that is something that can really be a powerful tool, especially for organizations who historically have not had adequate money and resources to address things like deferred maintenance. So I think that's really important to mention, because this is important. We do believe in this. We'll go to the next slide, please. This is actually going to be you, Cassidy. So I'm going to bounce back over to Cassidy, who will talk about enabling legislation and a little bit of the process, and then I'll continue after that.
Great, thanks, Devin. So one point that I made earlier is that GESPCs are in fact stipulated in Texas code and regulated through Texas code. So each of the 4 primary verticals in the public sector has a different piece of enabling legislation. I won't bore you with the details, but the point is that there is actually rules defining and regulating the process of a performance contract in Texas. And then one distinction with 2 of the verticals is for state agencies and public higher education. The statute actually stipulates that the State Energy Conservation Office will develop a guideline document and have a review period within the development of a ESPC for those verticals. That guideline document has ended up becoming a very valuable guideline for the 2 other verticals as well in practice. And if you're looking for a deeper dive and understanding kind of a point-by-point, step-by-step understanding of the process, as well as a number of helpful resources, that guideline document is really a good place to start. With that, actually go back to Devin.
Okay. So what's the value of a GESPC for my organization? Again, we can read the text on the screen, and that's important. There's a list of things. I think the good way to put it here is to understand that these performance contracts can really be utilized by different clients for very different purposes. And again, that kind of draws back to a really effective performance contract happens when you've got a good partner, but when also the client has a very good understanding of the process and how it works, but also what the expectations are, the value that they expect to get out of these projects. These projects can mean different things to different organizations. So for example, ESPCs can be used to address, failing equipment, deferred maintenance issues. For example, there might be a city that has a cluster of really old and dated HVAC units, and they don't have the capital budget to go and replace those, so they'll utilize things like lighting savings, controls, things like that, operation maintenance savings to fund a capital intensive project like HVAC. A ESPC can also be used to supplement a bond. So let's say a school district goes out for a bond and they don't get as much as they need, which is almost always the case. ESPCs can be used to maybe take some of the things off the bond list and get those to self-fund, and then use that extra bond money to go to other measures and other needs down the priority list for an organization. ESPC can also be used as a proactive approach as part of a bigger strategic energy plan. So this isn't always just about addressing catastrophic type failing equipment situations. This can also be a part of a very proactive and strategic energy plan moving forward. It's all about how you utilize your revenues and mitigate the expenses, and do that in a way that can mitigate the risk for the client. So these things can be different things to different organizations, but having I think the common area there is just really understanding, again, the process and what you want and expect to get out of it. We'll go to the next step, the next slide, please. So here's kind of a very elementary, basic way to explain the concept of the performance contracting. So as a partner, as a vendor, we are always going to look at 3 general buckets for savings. We're looking for 3 places where we can find inefficiencies and overspend, capture those, quantify those, and then direct those back into the facilities. And that comes from your utilities, your operation and maintenance budgets, and capital cost avoidance. And after being able to go and, do a utility data analysis and go inventory equipment and walk buildings and get a good understanding from the client, we can take and formulate a scope and attach guarantees. And if you go to the next slide, Cassidy, typically 20 to 40% savings is a good goal. It's a good way, is a good starting point to address that, identify that, and then direct that right back into the facilities. Okay, next slide. Here's just an added illustration. This $20 bill here at the bottom just represents money that is definitely going to be spent one way or another. And I guess one way to look at that is you can choose to continue to pay that money to utilities and kind of reactive maintenance, or you can decide to take a more progressive approach and put that into redirecting back into facility improvements, deferred maintenance, maximizing or supplementing bond measures, and overall just improving the working or learning environment of the facilities that you own. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand this back over to Cassidy and talk about putting a proper team together for one of these projects.
Right. So as you can imagine, when you are contemplating a project that may touch various aspects of the operation of your facilities in any public entity, there are a lot of people who need to be part of the conversation. And I like to illustrate, go through all of the different team members and really reinforce that this team needs to be formed early in the process and stick together throughout the entire process through M&V. So this team obviously includes your decision makers, your leadership, elected officials, city managers. Oversight may be a formal owner representative or just a project manager that is identified to sort of manage the contract from the city or school district side. And then your construction team, that is often your ESCO. They are doing the construction on the equipment retrofits. Your maintenance team members, these are the folks that are on the ground day to day in your facilities, and they're an important part of the conversation because they know what is going on in the facilities, who is going to actually maintain the pieces of equipment once they are in place, and can really offer valuable insight into what can and cannot work in the operation of an organization. Procurement, this is a publicly procured service, so there is some contracting and detailed procurement details. Finance, of course, you need your CFO or finance manager to agree that this is a viable and valuable financial arrangement for your entity. Legal, this is a contract. Of course, your city lawyer or other legal representation should be part of the negotiation and contract development. And then the folks who are actually charged with saving energy, analyzing energy on a day-to-day basis. And I really like to throw in the sustainability folks too, because especially if your organization has an overarching either energy management or climate management strategy, the ESPC is can be an important contribution to that overall guiding plan. So kind of going through the process, starting with that initial team, I'm going to kind of give a broad overview of a general process, and then Devin will jump into some more details and nuance about some of these steps in the process. But overall, again, you start with the building of that internal team, again, multidisciplinary internal team that is involved throughout. Start with a preliminary audit. This is often a free service. SECO offers a preliminary energy assessment service that can serve as that audit, and that's just kind of to give you a sense of opportunity in your facilities and assets. Once you decide that you want to move forward, you develop the RFQ document to seek qualifications for the selection of a partner ESCO. Devon's going to sort of go through some of the distinctions as to why the qualifications process is used in contracting in Texas. You select your partner ESCO. You do this through interviews and checking of references. Very important to find a partner that you feel good and comfortable with working long-term, because this is a substantial project that you're embarking on together. That ESCO will provide an investment-grade audit. This is a much more detailed audit in which you actually assign hard numbers and guarantees to the contract scope that you are formulating. With that agreed upon audit and scoping, your ESCO prepares the actual documentation for the GESPC, including the results of that IGA, and then the plan documents and process and draft contract. In Texas, in all 4 of the verticals that we discussed, that enabling legislation requires a third-party review. This is a engineer that reviews the IGA and verifies that those numbers make sense and that they have a basis in reality and in technical certainty. And then you go through construction, and your management and oversight is important in that construction, as with any construction process. And then once the project is complete, you go through post-construction operations and maintenance and measurement and verification. So that's kind of the overview. And then there are kind of distinct points in this process where there's important details to explore. And before we move on, yes, presentation will be shared with everyone following the webinar, as well as a recording. This is being recorded, and it will be posted to SPEAR's YouTube channel, and the link will be shared as well. Okay, Devin.
Okay, I wasn't nervous before, but now that I know we're being recorded, I'm all of a sudden really nervous. So here we go. Kidding. So on this 18, on this slide here with the process, thanks, Cassie, for giving a good overview on that. A couple of things that I want to highlight on this process slide. Again, we've got basically 45 minutes to go over a process that usually takes anywhere from 6 to even 12 or more months to develop. So we're really going high level on this. But something that I think is really important to understand, especially if you're newer to this concept, is that this process and the enabling legislation that Cassidy was talking about before, this process has really been designed to help the client mitigate risk, to help the client really be able to develop a full understanding of what goes into this project, what they're getting out of it, what is required of them. And again, like I keep mentioning, what they can expect, what the value is going to be, what the terms are. 2 particular places that I think are super important in this process. Number 1, I think that building the internal team, that cannot be stressed enough. I think with anything else, the more that there is common understanding, common cause, the more people in your organization that you have that's in support of this, that understands this, like anything else, the better communication that happens, the more smooth that's going to go in the long run. The more unified that you are with your team, the more smooth and efficient a process, and I think productive a process you'll have. The preliminary audit, I think, is just one of the great things about this industry, particularly if you're a client. This is, in most cases, where an ESCO will be willing to come in at no cost to do some due diligence on their own side, to make a business case to come in, look at your utilities, look at your how much you're spending, kind of do a data analysis on your utility information, do a preliminary site walk and get an idea of what the situation is like on the ground with the equipment. It gives you an opportunity to get to know them a little bit. It gives them an opportunity to get a feel for your organization. And I think that that's a really key part, where your potential partners kind of putting some skin in the game, putting some time and resources up on the table to get to know you better and to better understand your situation. But then also, by the time you've selected a partner and go into this step 5, which is the investment grade audit, this is the part of the process that's designed to give the client a full understanding of what's going into this project. So that includes the scope, what's going into it. Are you getting HVAC? Are you getting lighting? Is it controls? Is it power factor correction? Do you have water conservation measures that are in there? What's the term? What are the, is this going to be a 15-year project? Is it going to be a 20-year project? State will allow for up to 20 years. What are the savings terms? What are the guarantees? What methods of measurement and verification are going to be used to validate the performance of the job? This all happens in the investment grade audit. And through this process, and this is done on purpose, again, it mitigates the risk for the district. It really, or not the district, the client. It allows you the opportunity to really go through this process. By the time you're at step 5, that is the first point usually where the client will be somewhat financially obligated with the partner. In a good ideal case scenario, you get all the way to project construction, and the project closes and construction commences, and things start to happen. If for whatever reason, you as the client, after the investment grade audit, have had a chance to look at the full scope, see everything that's attached, all of the conditions, all of the savings, and if whether it's not a timing thing, or if it's not what you had in mind, or if there's just not a full agreement on the client side, the client has the opportunity to kind of bow out of this process with usually paying a breakaway fee or some kind of fee that would recoup the cost of the investment grade audit. And depending on the size of your organization and the size of the project, that can range, in my experience, anywhere from $25,000 to into the $150,000, mid $100,000 to recover the cost of that. But the point is that it gives the client a very good view of what happens in each step of the process, so that by the time it's ready to sign the contract and to break ground and do construction, there is 100% understanding of what this job is and what it's supposed to do for everybody that's involved in that part of the process. So I think that that's very important to understand, that this process it can be long, but it is long and it is detailed, and that's for a reason. That's so that everybody's at the best understanding, and it becomes the most effective process and project that it can be. I'm going to go to the next slide, please, Cassidy. So here's just an example of a side-by-side what you'll get out of a preliminary assessment versus what you could expect out of an investment grade audit. Keep in mind, a preliminary assessment is usually at no cost, and the purpose there is to get kind of a 35,000-foot view of what a project might look like, getting an understanding of the things that the client would want to have included in that project, so it's done at no cost. It takes a relatively short period of time. It's based on estimated savings. There are no bids. There are no costs associated. It's used to determine if further action is warranted. So again, we're both kind of doing a business case to see if it's worth it to pursue further. And the end product is basically just a project profile. The ESCO can show you generally the size of a project, what goes into it, and what generally that would look like. Whereas opposed to an investment grade audit, that's under contract, that, if you're a school district or a city, that requires council approval usually. That is done at a cost to the client. Again, there would be a break fee or a cost associated with recouping the cost of this if a project were not to go forward. But in most cases, if a project goes forward, then the cost of this investment grade audit is wrapped up in the cost, or wrapped up in the savings, and is paid for by the savings as part of the overall project. So that makes it so that out-of-pocket cost is not required from the client. These can take, it says 2 to 6 months. On exceptionally large jobs, it can be even longer than that. These are projects with guaranteed attached savings to those. So there is a legal obligation from the ESCO to ensure that the savings are met and that the debt service is paid for money that's borrowed to fund these projects. So this includes contractor bids, guaranteed costs. It's used to establish the overall scope, and the intended product is the ESPC project. We'll go to the next slide, please. So picking your partner. This can be one of the more challenging parts of the job, but it can also be of the process, but it can also be something that doesn't have to be super unnatural. As a member on the ESCO side, I always go back to the better understanding and the better communication that you have between ESCO and client, the better these projects typically go. I don't think that references can ever be overstated. If you have a ESCO that you think that you want to partner with, I don't think you can recommend enough to go and talk about the successful and maybe even unsuccessful projects that ESCO has been associated with. One thing that I will say is that these are construction projects, and almost none of them exist without some hiccups and some challenges that came along the way that were unanticipated. So maybe learning about how your potential ESCO partner dealt with some unexpected problems in a construction project would be helpful to understand and know. I think the more people on your team that get a chance to interact with your potential ESCO is beneficial. This can happen through site visits. Any good ESCO is going to really want to get a full understanding of the client's perspective on things from finances to equipment to legal to procurement. So the better working relationship that you have with your potential partner, I think bodes well for a long-standing partnership with an ESCO project. ESCO projects are procured as professional services. So this would be not unlike hiring a design engineer or an architect. So you put this out for requests for qualifications, not requests for proposals. So an ESCO project will not have specific costs attached. It will not be asking for specific pricing information. There are qualifications that you will select on. So the difference is there. I mean, again, no cost associated. You're really looking at a body of work, basing things maybe on interactions and relationships that you've built to that point. And the reason that that's important, I think, is self-evident. It's because on a typical job, these projects are 15-year terms. So you're going to want to select a partner that you obviously know you're going to have a long relationship with, that you have a good deal of confidence and understanding that you've got a good long-term partner there, because these are long-term projects that require a good partner that you feel good about for the long term. Underneath that, you can procure these through interlocal agreements. There are pre-approved lists through associations like Buy Board or TIPS or things like that, where these projects fall under that. So you can use those in situations. It just mostly depends on the client's appetite and temperament for procurement and how they select partners. But interlocal agreements are ways that you can select also. Next slide, please. So the financing part, again, ESPC or GESPC is not a finance tool, it's a procurement methodology. Some of the financing mechanisms used, so essentially once your project has gone through IGA, has been fully scoped, there have been savings, guarantees attached, everything's in place. Part of that process is finding the funding. So the client will typically borrow the money and have the debt service payments lined up to where the savings are enough to pay for the debt service payments over the term of the loan. Depending on your vertical market, depending on your preferences and how your organization spends money on projects like these, here are a few examples of instruments that have been used: tax-exempt lease purchase, maintenance tax note. SECO has a program, Lone Star, which has some very favorable terms. You can use cash and bond to either buy down these projects or to pay for them full out. And then there are also utility rebates that are available. And the one thing I want to talk about with the rebates, especially lately, there are a lot of really, really good rebates on things like LED lighting and different HVAC units. And from my observation, oftentimes ESCOs will not take rebate money and require that to pay off the project, but will just completely forward those monies to the client as just an added benefit of doing a project like this. So, you know, even a project around a $3 or $4 million scope can generate up to $150,000 worth of free rebate money from the utility. And if you take your own organization, I'm sure you can find a lot of valuable things to do with $150,000. But It's a very powerful part of the project, and a good ESCO or an ESCO partner will often be open to just forwarding those benefits on to you instead of having those go to pay down your project. And then below here are just some of the terms. The law allows for a 20-year term, repayment term. Again, bonds can be used, cash can be used. There's a lot of flexibility on the finance side depending on how you want to do it, but there are some options, and it would behoove you as a client to kind of get familiar with those different options available to you in terms of funding a project. And we'll go to the next slide, Cassidy. So measuring and verifying results. Measurement verification is a huge part of this project, and we talked about, is it too good to be true? The measurement verification part is what makes all of this a reality, and which holds the ESCO responsible for the performance of these projects. So measurement verification activities ensure legally and contractually required savings guarantees are met in an energy savings performance contract. Basically, measurement and verification is the methodology that's used to validate, measure, verify the savings that were achieved, and those savings are therefore said what they would be and are enough to pay for the debt service of a project like this in a situation where this project was financed. So M&V uses what's called the IPMVP, which is the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. That's the industry standard. Within that, there are different methodologies to use. For example, you might measure and verify lighting savings differently than you would building envelope savings or control savings or HVAC savings. The key element here is that the measurement and verification step of this process is absolutely something that you with your partner sit down and determine what would be the best and most appropriate methodology for your organization, but also for your particular project. So M&D will basically appropriately allocates the risk, and the risk is often mostly put on the partner. Now, when it comes to measurement or maintenance and operations savings, there are some variances to that, but it's just important to understand that that's part of the incentive to do these jobs, that you've got a trusted partner that takes the financial liability of the performance of these jobs, takes that off of your shoulders and takes that on themselves as your partner. So it reduces the uncertainties of the savings, accurately assesses the costs and the energy savings, and potentially identifies operations and maintenance issues. There are also other operation and maintenance things. A good ESCO partner will be prepared to train and essentially help to hand off the project back to the client and enable the client to operate and maintain their buildings in a way that will continue to achieve the savings. And that's part of being a good partner, is the different trainings that can take place so that the client can really be self-sufficient and operate these projects like they're supposed to work. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Cassidy. I see if we have some questions to answer.
Definitely start adding those questions. We're getting towards the end. I was just going to go through a few resources available. There are many resources available on performance contracts, and then we'll kind of move into our question and answer portion of the presentation. So the Energy Services Coalition is a great resource. Not only are there a number of sample documents on the website, again, which will be shared with you in my follow-up email, case studies, sample contracts, but members of the Texas chapter are also an excellent resource as well. We will send, if you are interested in learning more, if you want a presentation for your leadership, for your council of governments, if you have an audience that you think could benefit from training and information around ESPCs, we will send 2 of our members to you to give a presentation and answer questions in a non-sales environment. We are representatives of our voluntary nonprofit organization, not the member companies that we represent. So it's a great opportunity to learn from the experts about the contracting mechanism. SECO, State Energy Conservation Office, again, excellent resource. They're the co-chair of our ESC chapter. The guidelines document that I mentioned at the top is an excellent step-by-step and very detailed resource, especially for state agencies. There are also links to the enabling legislation on their ESPC website. So I'll get you that link. Department of Energy has a wealth of resources. So a number of years ago, I'm sure someone else in this call knows all of the history. The federal government promoted the use of ESPCs considerably in GSA funded projects. So the Department of Energy has generated a wealth of resources related to ESPCs, including one resource here, the toolkit, that I think is particularly valuable. And then little self-promotion. Last year, I produced a white paper on behalf of CELC related to ESPCs. Really interesting experience for me. I interviewed ESCOs, SECOs, city managers, energy managers across the spectrum of experts, and got their feedback on kind of where are the pinch points, where are the pain points, what do you need to know going in, and how do you prepare? So I think it's good, and hope you agree. So with that, brings us to the end. Devin and I's contact information is there, and we'll follow up. So we do have one question. At what point in the process is state or local government ESPC able to bow out without further commitment? Devin, you want to take that?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding that part of the question right, where you enter into a financial obligation is once you have essentially selected a partner through either the RFQ process or an interlocal agreement, and they begin the investment grade audit. So usually, like I said, depending on the size of the project and the scope, that can, the cost associated from either a break fee or whatever the terms are can be anywhere from, $25,000 and up. But before you get into an obligation of a multi-million-dollar project, that's kind of your cutoff point of no longer not having financial obligation. That's when you enter into the investment grade audit contract.
Great.
I hope that answered that.
Yeah, I think so. And to the question of how the ESC chapter can help, as I just mentioned, we have a number of resources. We hold quarterly chapter meetings, and we rotate those throughout the state. So as I mentioned, our next one will be in North Central Texas, and then over the summer we should have one in the Gulf Coast region. And then in October, we will have our chapter meeting probably around the national conference here in Austin, and then rotate again, North Texas, Gulf Coast, Central Texas. We hope to increase the number of educational opportunities that we are producing. So webinars, expect more webinars, maybe written content, white papers to be generated at some point in the future. An observation that I have in the work that I do around energy efficiency in the public sector is there are a lot of tools, there are a lot of resources, there are a lot of white papers, and there is still an opportunity for education, but I'm not personally sure writing more things down is the solution. So these in-person conversations, I think, are one of the most valuable ways to assuage fears and concerns and answer questions. So I encourage anyone on the call who is trying to convince leadership, is trying to convince yourself that ESPCs are a good opportunity to have some ESC members come and chat with you. And they'll take off their vendor labels and just talk to you about the real nuts and bolts of the industry. I think it's a really great resource.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, Cassidy, is, and I think this is maybe one thing that I would say in closing, and I don't know if we've got a couple more questions, but I want to make sure to get this in. Just as an industry participant, as someone in the industry, I think it's just really important to convey the message from my perspective, for example, that there are a lot of good partners, there are a lot of good ESCOs in Texas. I compete with different people, and And I can go out and operate with a pretty good level of confidence that even on the jobs that I'm not associated with, there are good companies in this state that can really help you out. And one of the ways that I really like how this business works is if there are any of you that have not explored this too deeply, or you're curious but you don't really want to commit and you don't know that much, I would just highly recommend to reach out to any of the companies in the industry who will be more than willing to come out and listen and help you to get educated on the process. And I really believe that in most all cases, you're going to be way better off later after a project like this than you were before, regardless of what partner you choose. But I would also add to that there are different approaches that some of the partners take. And I think that it's really important, it's incumbent upon the client to go out and find out what those differences are and to find out how those differences better align with their own particular objectives and goals. But there is a wealth of information in this industry. There are a lot of good companies that can be very helpful. And I would just highly encourage anyone who's thinking about even learning more about this to reach out and learn as much as you can, because there's a lot to be gained and benefited from these projects.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that the folks that are on the ground doing these projects are consummate experts and working on something that they believe in. So they're an excellent resource as well. And Devin, one of the things that I've been interested to learn as a person that's somewhat educating myself about this industry over the last year is that these contracts are not just for lighting controls and HVAC units. Can you maybe speak to some of the emerging project scopes that you see these working well for?
Sure. I mean, I think, again, if you kind of stay with the concept that we're trying to leverage energy savings to fund capital improvements, that kind of helps to understand what the general purpose is. But we're starting to see, I mean, not just starting to, we've seen things for a while. Renewables are starting to become more and more viable, where they're actually renewable technologies that over a 15-year period or a 20-year period that's allowed by the law, where not only will this thing help you with energy conservation, but there's savings, even surplus savings associated with these technologies that can fund other things, capital intensive things like roofs or HVAC units. There are power factor correction things that can be done. Water conservation is a really big topic. And especially in the parts of the state where water is getting more and more expensive and less just harder to come by, those things also become super valuable. I think it all goes back to what things bring particular value to the client, whether it has to do with their geography or their own strategic plan. But there are a lot of different things that are emerging to help fund these projects and make them even more viable.
Absolutely. And last year at our member workshop, I led a panel discussion on the role of resilience in energy management, and there was part of that conversation about ESPCs can also be used to harden and strengthen critical infrastructure in your communities that are an important piece of creating a resilient infrastructure system in your city. So resilience, renewables, and good old energy efficiency and water efficiency are all in there.
I would also add that you.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that, Cassidy. I would also add that you can't ever overestimate the value of the good public relations that these can generate for an organization. Like if a city has an appetite for a lot of renewables or an energy efficiency, type of component in a lot of their future plans, these things speak very loudly, and the numbers are there. Like when you get down to brass tacks and you see that you can self-fund millions of dollars worth of improvements with money that you're already using through energy savings, that can really help organizations express a lot of what they're trying to get across to their constituents and their voters and parents and things like that. These can be very powerful for that as well.
Great. Okay, well, unless we have any other questions from the audience, going once, going twice, we're going to leave it there. So thank you again for your time and for your lunch time, and very much hope that the folks on the line today will continue to engage in both of our organizations, and we'll make sure that you get all of the information that you have, that you need going forward. So have a good afternoon, and
Thanks, everybody.
see you next time. Thanks, Devin.
Bye.